do this again. Primarily, I'm going to be reviewing Fields of Blood, the Prairie Grove campaign. I did this video once, and my camera died on it. But I figure I ought to get it out of the way. So I've been reading books without giving reviews because, quite honestly, the large number of books, well, I don't read that much anymore, but even so, the books that I read, most of them are just, they're good. I don't have a hell of a lot to say. I'm going to throw a couple of little shout outs to a couple of these and to something else that I put a couple of books back in the little free libraries, which is where I get most of my books, and I think I got all of these, but and one of them I really should have kept just for the picture in it. I don't remember what it was called. It was okay, kind of a science fiction-y post-Holocaust type thing, but the ending was really unsatisfying. But what was awesome about it was the pictures of the characters, especially one who looked like he was entirely drawn off of Sylvester Stallone from Rambo. It put the era of the book, etc., right into focus as to when it had to have been done. And they probably found somebody who looked like him, or else just kind of drew it off of him. I know most artists will work with a model, so I assume that they did, but there's no real reason to have, but it's just hilarious. And it's basically Stallone with a fur coat on and very little else. Actually, it's a fur scarf that's coming down. I don't know. It's just a weird thing. All right. Anyway, it just looks so silly. But to the main event is this guy. So this is about a campaign that I knew very little about to begin with, but had an interest in, and I don't think there's a game on it, which is a real pity, because it is actually an interesting, not just the campaign, but just the battle even, the Battle of Prairie Grove. You have the old GBACW battles for Wilson's Creek and Pea Ridge. This would be the next one, and really the final one in the series, and really should have been covered, because it is an intriguing battle. Unfortunately, the most interesting part of it is, like with some other situations, like, say, Chancellorsville or whatever, is really kind of the maneuvering around and the blundering. So it might actually be more suitable to something like the, not the great campaigns of the American Civil War. I don't really like that as much, but the Civil War campaign series that Clash of Arms does, that I do actually really like, even though it's got a lot of funky little things in it that can cause you to say, it's not really even a series, but it is so different from everything else that it really is. Anyway, back to book side of things, right? So this is well written. It covers, and I'm not going to go into as much detail as the first time I recorded this. I really went into a lot, but it covers the commanding officers from sort of the point that they took command in the theater to the point that they left command, but also fuzzes out a little on both sides of that, giving a little bit of information of their previous careers, etc., and a little bit of where they ended up afterwards. The commanders, in terms of for the Confederate side, the field commander is General Hindman. And the book takes a fairly sanguine view of him, one that I think is maybe a little too rosy. Mainly because as an administrator, he was doing kind of a good job, but as a in terms of the political realities, he got himself in a lot of trouble, got somebody put in over him because of it, someone who was less effective. Now, in both, in the case of Hindman, he was an amateur. However, he seemed to have a fair grasp of certain elements of military theory, etc. So in the campaign, he ends up doing, I don't know. He constantly seems to be overestimating the capability of his army or underestimating the capability of the Union army that he's facing. And he serves as okay on the battlefield, but he definitely made some blunders, which, you know, are not, don't shine well on him. He also, though, and you can see this for good or for bad, pushed his forces pretty damn hard. Now, to some extent, you can say, well, you know, if you look at that means he was able to get more movement and get jumps on the enemy and such not in ways that were effective, or potentially so. But the problem was he wore his men out so damn much that it became kind of problematic. It's not good terrain to move through. This was a campaign that happened mainly in the late autumn and winter. So not the best terrain to be in. Certainly not the best weather to be, you know, sleeping outdoors and whatnot. Now, on the other side, the command structure is a little more different. So Hindman is technically under Holmes for most of this campaign. Holmes is kind of a non-entity. Hindman usually gets his way, but Holmes puts up resistance to any kind of aggressive action in quite a few cases and seems overly cautious, perhaps. At least that's the attitude that the author is taking in a lot of cases. On the other side of the command, we have a very interesting structure. First of all, we have Curtis, who I feel is kind of the unsung hero of the Trans-Mississippi. He doesn't get a lot of good, you know, there's nothing wrong with his command, but he's kind of seen as this off the board, you know, influence, and doesn't really do anything to hurt anybody or help anybody throughout it. In the officially in charge of the Army of the Frontier, I believe it's called, is Schofield, who this author really takes to task. Now, Schofield wasn't present during most of the campaign. He had some illnesses and whatnot, and kind of went and hid away in Missouri without getting involved in it. But the author's main complaint with Schofield seems to be sort of a behind-the-scenes backstabbing, denigrating everyone's character, and certainly he came out ahead for all from the Civil War as a whole, without having put together much of a record of his own. He was serving under Curtis here without being commanding in the field, and really there wasn't much else that he could do after this. But he managed to get himself transferred east and made friends with both Grant and Sherman, and got himself to be commander of the army, I think, eventually. As opposed to the commanders who, you know, Curtis, who was technically in charge, and I think really did a fantastic job in the Trans-Mississippi as a whole, and then little birdie, and then the two Union commanders who are Blunt is the is sort of the field commander in Schofield's absence, and he kind of presses the Confederates, not terribly hard, but harder than most of the Union officers had been doing, and somewhat accidentally at times, which is to say, you know, the Confederates do some movement, he does a counter and ends up in a more exposed position and then has to like do something to deal with that, you know, stuff like that. Um, for the actual, the book is basically about a third about the primary battle and its immediate circumstances around it, which is to say that there's a lot broader context being provided than just the campaign itself, as far as I'm concerned. Uh, and I find that pretty useful because I have a hard time picturing things from the little maps and whatnot. This is something, I don't know. There's a few maps in here. There's also some pictures. There's a lot of historical pictures of the people, but there's pictures that show you, some of the terrain as it is. And this wasn't a great shot, but they give you a perspective where an attack was made or something that gives you some idea, but not a hell of a lot in a little black and white picture. And then the other side of it is there's these little campaign maps. And I hear people that show the battlefield and then you have to kind of have this thing memorized in your head as you're reading stuff, or else nothing makes sense, and I can't do that. I find it so confusing when people say, I learned my military history through books. I don't intend to get it out of games. I have to say, I'm the exact fucking opposite. If I don't have a map and little pieces to move around on it, whether I'm playing the game or just displaying what a situation was at a particular time, I cannot picture what's going on in the battlefield at all. I really don't get much from even from something like this that's relatively well written. Well, it is well written, but I just have to put a qualifier in there for some reason. But when you give me a working model that I can play with, whether or not I'm trying to win a game and follow the rules to a game, or even just being able to see it laid out in front of me in that sort of fashion, it's just a hell of a lot more useful to me. Which is one of the big things. When I see a game, I tend to learn better than when I'm working from a book. Now, some people use both in conjunction, which was one of my thoughts, that I might have gotten this, somebody sent me a game and sometimes they pair a book with it. I don't think that was the case. I think I found this in a little free library for all purposes. But if you sent it to me, let me know. I owe you a thank you, because I did enjoy it. And if you sent me it with a game, let me know what the fuck the game is, because I can't find anything on this, and certainly nothing that I own really calls out and says, yeah, that's that campaign. So for the going back to the Union commanders, Blunt, both Blunt and Hinman are seen in fairly good light, and then there's a couple of other commanders who show up a little bit, but in the primary of this battle, one of Blunt's subordinates is Heron, who plays a major role in the battle. So the way the battle actually plays out is that Blunt is sitting here. He's pursued Hinman perhaps too far and was thinking about falling back, just considering back and forth decisions on whether to press or fall back on his supply line. And Hinman comes forward, occupies positions that were lightly defended ahead of Blunt, and Blunt is expecting to either be attacked. When Hinman moves, Blunt is expecting to be attacked from a flank position or whatever, sends a call for reinforcements to Heron, which gets there and Heron starts moving. They're both fairly active commanders as portrayed in this. But no, Hinman isn't just going around to perform a flank attack. He's actually trying to completely get behind Blunt and smash him from the rear. Well, what ends up happening is that the road he takes, and he takes like a wrong turn or something, the road he takes basically splashes him right into Heron. And he and Heron engage in a battle, and he's got significantly more forces, because basically Hinman's the entire army facing Blunt, and Heron is about a third of Blunt's overall forces in play. that were back protecting the supply lines, along with the wagons and everything else. And what ends up happening is a huge amount of artillery from the Union is firing. The Confederates aren't able to get their guns to work as well just because of positioning. They're in a defensive position where they kind of place them stupidly. They don't smash into Heron as hard as they might have. They kind of let the lead unit stop and let other units go by to engage and take position at a time when they could have actually gained an advantage. And this is by Hindman's orders, because he's somewhat worried about Blunt coming up and hitting him from behind now that he's caught in a pincer, essentially. And eventually Heron ends up attacking a fairly well-defended position that the Confederates are sitting on, and multiple rounds of attack that don't go well for the Union at all because they're outnumbered trying to hit a well-defended position. But then the Confederates come storming down late in the day and pretty much they make some ground, but they take tremendous casualties in doing so. And I think just at this point, Blunt is showing up, and and then there's I think a second day of battle. I don't even remember now. It's so fucking hard for me to picture what's going on just from reading it as opposed to playing it out. Trying to remember if there was a second. No, there was not a second day of battle. There should have probably been, because the Confederates could have held a position and let the Union attack them. The Confederates would have been in a really annoying place for the Union. But on the other hand, their forces were really, really ragged and tired. And so they pulled out when there was an expected second day for the Union, and then negotiated a truce to like recover casualties and whatnot, to cover the fact that they were retreating. And but then there was a follow-up where basically most of the supplies and whatnot that the Confederates had and all their forward basing and whatever was just captured. And they basically lost the entire campaign in that retreat. Their army was, the Army of the Trans-Mississippi was almost completely destroyed. And it's really hard to see that Hindman should get any kind of good treatment for this. It feels like he kind of blundered into a bad position by taking an aggressive stance, but when he couldn't follow up, he was all three, I think. I'm not sure about Heron, but Blunt and Hindman were both amateurs. Blunt seems to have done a pretty damn good job, considering maybe just taking advantage of his enemy's mistakes. But to me, Hindman just went for an overly aggressive stance, and then when it came down to the tactics on the battlefield, just blew it completely. In many different sides of the issue. And this could have been a potential threat to Missouri if he was able to win the battles. Given, what had happened previously in these battles, usually the armies were in no position to really take advantage of a big victory, even a big victory. This was not that big a victory. This was kind of a drawn battle, to tell you the truth. But the Union won the pursuit pretty damn heavily, and more or less ran the Army of the Trans-Mississippi out of the way. In terms of writing style, a lot of it is, just giving you sort of the historical background, some references into historical documents, etc. But what I did find kind of interesting was to kind of, and I could not remember the name for the life of me the last time I did the video, but in terms of the Ken Burns documentaries, where they give a view of the battlefield, from letters home, sometimes from just privates or whatever, giving information back, and also from some of the civilians who were in the area of the campaign to describe issues, just to give you a better picture of the whole thing. Overall, I found it enjoyable. I'm probably not going to keep it because how many times do I want to read about a given campaign? And I'm not, going to make a game on this. Although one should be made, I'm just not that kind of person. let's move on to the others. So I talked about the one book, and I don't remember what the fuck it was called. I wish I had kept it just because it was cute to do this. I had like two that I gave away. These two I'm going to keep. This one, The Silent Tower, is the first book in a series. I might end up, because I picked it up at a particular place, I might end up seeing more of it, show up at the same place or not. Who knows? But it's about a sort of a fantasy world. The main character is the child of a mage, is the grandson of a mage, and was expected to become a mage himself, but didn't have any magical powers worth mentioning, and becomes sort of a guard to his grandfather. But then, what the story kind of links to, and there's actually a second main character who is a female programmer in modern day times. What it really kind of works into is that the two worlds are both kind of infected with this problem, a problem with magic in the one world, and perhaps with technology in the other world, in our world essentially. And it kind of links to them nicely. And I thought it had some interesting ideas, so I wanted to keep it in case I find more along that. And then this one's a little bit of silliness. Basically the modern world, but it's sort of like an alt history where everyone worships Egyptian gods. I can't quite remember if that was a new thing or if that's been the case all along. Maybe I never was able to figure that out. This one's a standalone. I don't remember. Yeah. I don't know why I'm keeping this one, but it had kind of a gritty, Harry Harrison type of fighting, the Hammer Slammers thing that I did a little earlier, type of fighting type situation. A lot of the main character in it is sort of a special ops type guy who ends up co-opted into this group that's basically trying to overthrow the gods. Now, not only are the gods being worshipped being the Egyptian gods, but they're actually in the book, and their own struggles are presented. And that might have been the cute thing that I kind of wanted to deal with there. And there was just stuff in it that I kind of thought was neat, that I'd probably want to read it again, even if it wasn't that great a book. And neither of these are anything that fancy. It's just, this is a better book, and why I'm reviewing it, but I'm less likely to want to reread it. Whereas these guys, I have my little addiction to my not great fantasy and science fiction stuff, but I'm okay, and definitely want to reread it at least once before it goes back on the pile. So that's that. We'll get back to Espinosa. I don't know. I got my addiction to deal with. And the books that I'm going to reread, I just dump them behind my game box, behind the gaming boxes that I keep over here. They just get shoved back there. I've got some boxes of clothing back there too, stuff that I'm too fat for. All right, up it goes.